The night before he shipped out, Dmitri Kolesnikov sat at the kitchen table and wrote his wife a poem. He was 27 years old, 3 months married. His wife's name was Olga, and she was sitting right there, watching him, wondering what had gotten into him. Dmitri wasn't a poem-writing man. He was a naval engineer. He fixed turbines. He trusted systems and calculations and things that worked the way they were supposed to work. But that night, he wrote her a poem. Some of the lines were about death. Olga read it and smiled. She thought it was romantic. She folded it carefully and put it somewhere safe. She had no idea what it meant. The next morning, August 11th, 2000, Dmitri Kolesnikov kissed his wife goodbye, walked out the door of their apartment in the naval town of Vidyayevo, and boarded the submarine Kursk. He never came home. The last message he sent to the world was written in complete darkness. At the bottom of the Barents Sea, with a pen he could not see, on paper he could not see, in letters he could not read back to himself. He pressed the pen to the page and wrote anyway, because 22 other men were in that compartment with him, and someone needed to write their names down. This is the story of those words. It is also the story of the 9 days that turned a survivable disaster into something unforgivable. The story of a government that chose its reputation over the lives of its own sailors and paid for that choice in a currency it will never fully account for. To understand what happened on August 12, 2000, you need to understand 2 things: the Kursk and Russia. The K-141 Kursk was, by any measure, an extraordinary machine. An Oscar II-class nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, 154 meters long, nearly 14,000 tons, armed with 24 cruise missiles capable of striking targets over 1,000 kilometers away. The Russian Navy had commissioned it in 1994. From the moment it entered service, they treated it like a trophy. They called it unsinkable. That word has a history of ending badly for the people who use it. But Russia needed that word in the summer of 2000, because the decade since the Soviet collapse had hollowed out the Russian military, and the Navy most of all. Funding had evaporated. Ships rusted at dock. Sailors went months without pay. Maintenance was deferred, then deferred again, then quietly forgotten. The proud Northern Fleet that had once challenged the United States across every ocean was falling apart from the inside. And into this moment stepped a new president who needed to show the world that Russia was back. Vladimir Putin had been in office for 4 months. He was a man obsessed with projecting strength. The naval exercise scheduled for August 2000 was the largest Russia had conducted since the Soviet era. 118 men boarded the Kursk, the Barents Sea, the biggest show of force in a decade. Among those 118 men was Captain Lieutenant Dmitri Kolesnikov. He had graduated from the Dzerzhinsky Naval Engineering School in 1995. Quiet, competent, reliable, the kind of officer militaries run on. Head of the turbine unit in the 7th Department. He understood that submarine the way a surgeon understands a body. And 3 months before he boarded the Kursk for the last time, he had married Olga. Olga was 25. She had moved to Vidyayevo to be with him, to that apartment with the kitchen table, the small windows looking out over the naval base, the life they were just beginning to build together. 3 months in, everything still new. The night before he left, he sat at that table and wrote her a poem with lines about death. She kept it. She thought it was the kind of thing a sentimental young husband writes before going to sea. She was wrong about that. Here is something that gets overlooked in the official accounts of the Kursk disaster. The torpedo that destroyed the submarine had already been leaking for days before anyone boarded the ship. The Type 65 torpedo ran on liquid high-test peroxide, highly concentrated hydrogen peroxide, a substance so violently reactive that NATO navies had looked at it decades earlier and said, "Too dangerous." They switched to safer propulsion. Russia kept using HTP. And in one of the Kursk's Type 65 torpedoes, a faulty weld had allowed that peroxide to seep through the casing. Slowly, invisibly, before the exercise, before departure, before the 118 men came aboard. Nobody flagged it, or somebody saw it and stayed quiet. Because the exercise was scheduled, because the president needed a demonstration of power, because in 2000, in Russia's Navy, you did not cancel the biggest exercise in a decade over a torpedo weld. You had to choose. Somewhere in the chain of command, someone weighed the state of aging equipment against the pressure of a presidential showcase and made a calculation. It'll be fine. The Kursk is unsinkable. That calculation was wrong. August 12, 2000. Saturday morning. The Barents Sea, north of Norway, inside the Arctic Circle. Cold gray water. Nokhedaisen. The kind of sea that doesn't notice you. The Kursk was running a torpedo drill. Routine. The kind they'd done 100 times. At 11:28 a.m., the HTP reached the catalyst. The torpedo casing ruptured. Fire erupted in the torpedo tube. The first explosion shook the ship, violent enough to knock men from their feet, loud enough to be heard in the rear compartments, but survivable. The hull held. For 135 seconds, men in the forward section fought the fire. For 135 seconds, the Kursk was wounded but whole. Then the second explosion happened. 250 times more powerful than the first. The forward section of the submarine, the torpedo room, the missile compartments, everything in the bow was obliterated in a fraction of a second. The shockwave traveled the length of the ship like a physical force, tearing bulkheads, collapsing decks, extinguishing every life it found. Seismographs in Alaska registered a 3.5 magnitude event. The Kursk pitched toward the seafloor at nearly 10 times the speed of free fall and hit the bottom of the Barents Sea at 108 meters depth. The impact alone registered as a second seismic event. Roughly 95 men died in those first two explosions. Most had no time for fear, no time for a final thought, no time for anything at all. The speed of catastrophe is its only mercy. But in the rear of the submarine, in compartments 6, 7, and 8, men survived. Thrown to the floor, burned, bleeding, disoriented. Ears ringing, metal screaming around them. Smoke in the corridors. The ship tilted at an angle that told them immediately what had happened. And they made a decision. They moved. 23 men pushed through damaged passageways toward the back of the ship. Toward Compartment 9, the rearmost section, the smallest, the one with the emergency escape hatch in the ceiling. Dmitri Kolesnikov was with them. When the last man was inside, they sealed the hatch behind them. 23 men. One sealed compartment. An escape hatch directly overhead. The surface of the Barents Sea, 108 meters above. They were alive. They had food, water, emergency equipment, and a will to live. They had everything except the one thing that mattered. And that thing was 100 kilometers away, in an office in Moscow, deciding that Russia didn't need any help. Compartment 9 was not built for waiting. It was small, cold, and getting colder. The lights were flickering. The air tasted of chemicals and seawater. Carbon dioxide was building. 23 men breathing the same finite supply of air in a sealed space. And water was seeping in, not fast enough to drown them. Fast enough to keep reminding them the ocean was everywhere around them, pressing in from all sides, patient in a way that human beings cannot be. Kolesnikov took charge. Think about that for a moment. Not because it's surprising, he was the senior officer, but because of what it means in practice. In the dark and the cold and the flooding and the fear, with men who were injured and men who were terrified and men who understood exactly what their situation was. He organized them. He kept them calm. He maintained order. He gave them something to do. And at 1:15 in the afternoon, 1 hour and 45 minutes after the second explosion, while the lights were still holding, he picked up a pen. He wrote all 23 names, every man in the compartment. He described their condition precisely: the rising carbon dioxide, the increasing pressure, the water. He noted why they couldn't use the escape hatch yet. The pressure differential between the compartment and the water column above would kill them if they opened it prematurely. They had to wait for equalization. They had to wait for rescue. He folded the note into his jacket. Then he wrote a private note to Olga. And on the surface, above 108 meters of freezing black water, something was already going wrong in a completely different way. The Russian Navy knew the Kursk was silent. They knew it had gone to the bottom. And within hours, a decision had been made, not announced, not documented in any press release, but made about how this was going to be handled. Then something happened that nobody outside Russia's government expected. The offers of help were refused. Within 24 hours, Norway had divers standing by. Britain reached out. Germany, France. One by one, they offered their best people and their best equipment. They were close. They were ready. All they needed was a yes. Russia said no. The official reason was national security. Sensitive military technology aboard the Kursk could not be exposed to foreign eyes. That was the stated position. But the real reason was older and simpler and more nakedly human than any policy consideration. It was shame. Putin's Russia, the Russia of national renewal, of restored military pride, of projecting strength to a watching world, could not say those 3 words. We need help. Not publicly, not on camera, not in front of the families waiting at the pier in Vidyayevo. To call Norway was to admit that the Russian Navy couldn't handle its own disaster. And in the calculus of that moment, that admission felt, to someone in Moscow, worse than the alternative. The families in Vidyayevo were told there were survivors, that rescue operations were underway, that the Navy had the situation under control. Wives gathered at the pier and stared at the sea. Some brought flowers for when their men came home. They were given optimistic briefings by officials who knew, or should have known, exactly what was happening at the bottom of the Barents Sea. And Putin stayed on vacation. 5 days. 5 days after the Kursk sank with 118 men aboard, the president of Russia was still at his Black Sea resort. His advisors told him that leaving would create additional panic. He stayed. He believed them. He rested while the Navy sent broken submersibles down to a hatch they couldn't open, day after day, attempt after attempt, failure after failure. He made a choice. He chose to trust the people telling him everything was manageable. And that choice, compounded by every official who refused foreign help, every briefer who gave false hope to families, every bureaucrat who prioritized the image of competence over the reality of failure, those choices stacked into a weight that 23 men could not survive. For days of Russian Navy rescue attempts, the submersibles could not dock. The Kursk's anti-acoustic rubber coating, designed to absorb sonar and make the submarine stealthy, was preventing the rescue vehicles from establishing a watertight seal on the escape hatch. Equipment that hadn't been properly maintained. Crews who hadn't trained for exactly this scenario. Currents that pushed the submersibles off target in near-zero visibility. Every approach failed. Every day, another failure. Another press conference with careful language about ongoing operations. Another morning of families at the pier still waiting. Then something happened no one expected, or rather, something that everyone outside Russia had been expecting from the beginning. On August 17th, Putin accepted the Norwegian and British offers of help. 5 days after the disaster, Norwegian civilian divers mobilized within hours. Ships departed. Equipment was loaded. By August 19th, the team was on site. On August 21st, 9 days after the Kursk sank, Norwegian divers descended to the escape hatch of Compartment 9. They attached. They opened the hatch. It took them hours. Not days. Hours. After 9 days of Russian failure. After the refusal of help for 5 of those 9 days. After all of that, Norwegian civilian divers, using standard professional equipment, opened that hatch in hours. When it swung open, the compartment was flooded. Everyone was dead. Sit with that for a moment. 23 men survived the initial explosions. They were alive. Their leader was calm and organized. They had a hatch above them that foreign divers were capable of opening in hours. And the only thing standing between them and survival was 9 days of decisions made by people who went home afterward. The exact window is unknowable. The flash fire in the compartment destroyed the physical evidence that might have pinpointed the exact time of death. We know Kolesnikov was alive at 15:15 on August 12th. We know the fire happened sometime after that. We don't know exactly when, which means we don't know, and we'll never know, whether any of those 23 men were still alive when foreign help finally arrived. We will never know how close it was. Let's go back inside, to Compartment 9, to the dark. At some point in the afternoon of August 12th, the lights in the compartment failed. Complete darkness. Not dim light, not emergency lighting. Complete darkness. The kind where you hold your hand directly in front of your face and see nothing. 23 men in a sealed metal room at the bottom of the ocean. No light. No sound from outside. Water still rising. Air still worsening. Cold settling deep into bone. And no way to know, no way at all, whether anyone on the surface was coming. Dmitri Kolesnikov picked up his pen. He could not see the page. He placed the nib against the paper and wrote by touch. By the muscle memory of 10 years of naval reports and engineering logs and official documents. All those thousands of pages his hand had produced without needing to be told how. He trusted his hand. He wrote, "It's dark here to write, but I'll try by feel. It seems like there are no chances, 10 to 20%. Let's hope that at least someone will read this." He listed names again, the men who had come from the other sections. He made sure everyone was accounted for, that no one from compartments 6, 7, and 8 was missing from the record. He was the last officer. The list was his responsibility. Even here, especially here. Then he wrote one final line. "Regards to everybody, no need to despair." He signed it, Kolesnikov. He put the note inside his jacket. No need to despair. He was 27 years old, married for 3 months, riding in total darkness at the bottom of the Barents Sea, with failing air and rising water and 10 to 20% odds. And his last recorded words, the last thing he wanted to leave behind, were an instruction to everyone else not to be sad. The man who was dying was the one doing the comforting. Sometime after 15:15, a chemical oxygen regeneration cartridge, saturated with the seawater that had been slowly flooding the compartment, reacted. The potassium superoxide hit the water. The reaction generated heat, violent, sudden, catastrophic in that small sealed space. The oil residue, the chemical fumes, the debris of a destroyed submarine, it all found flame. There was a flash fire. The oxygen in Compartment 9 was gone in seconds. All 23 men died. 10 days after the Kursk sank, Putin came to Vidyayevo. He had finally left his vacation. 5 days in, under mounting public pressure, he had come back to Moscow, and now he stood in the officers' club of the naval base before 400 to 600 people. Families, residents, sailors, all of them furious and broken and looking at a president who had been on the Black Sea while their sons were dying. The meeting was designed to look like compassion, a president among his people. It became something else. A woman in the room stood up. Her name was Nadezhda Tylik. She was the mother of Lieutenant Sergei Tylik, who had been in Compartment 9. She was not a political person. She was not an activist. She was a mother who had been told her son was alive, then told there was hope, then told to be patient, while the government spent 9 days failing to save him. She looked at Putin and the deputy prime minister beside him. "You better shoot yourselves now. We won't let you live, bastards." She would not sit down. She would not be quieted. She kept talking, the raw, uncalculated fury of someone who has been lied to for 9 days and has nothing left to lose. And then something happened that no one in that room could have anticipated. A woman in civilian clothes stepped up behind Nadezhda Tylik. She was a nurse, though she wore no uniform. She moved quietly. She produced a syringe, and without warning, without consent, she pressed it against Tylik's arm, through her jacket, and injected a sedative. Nadezhda Tylik stopped speaking mid-sentence. She went limp. She was carried out of the room. A camera captured it. Russian television never aired the footage. The rest of the world saw it everywhere. A grieving mother, silenced with a needle, carried out of a room for telling a president what she thought of him. Tylik's husband initially told investigators that he had requested the sedative himself, that his wife was overwrought, that he was trying to protect her. It took 4 months for the truth to come out. He had not asked for anything. The injection had been done, in Tylik's own words, to shut her mouth. There was only one message in that syringe. Sit down. Stop asking questions. This is over. In a single moment, on camera, in front of the families of the dead, the Russian government demonstrated everything that had defined its handling of those 9 days. Not cruelty exactly, something colder than cruelty. A bureaucratic reflex. When a narrative is challenged, neutralize the challenge. When someone says something inconvenient, make them stop. Nadezhda Tylik was inconvenient. They made her stop. On October 27, 2000, the Russian government released Kolesnikov's notes to the media. The divers who recovered the bodies had found the notes inside his jacket, where he had placed them. The paper was water-damaged but legible. The first note, written in the light, had steady, clear handwriting. The second note, written in the dark by touch, was different. The letters drifted. Some words ran together. Some letters floated off their baseline, as if written by someone whose hand was no longer entirely under conscious control. The handwriting of a man in failing physical condition, in complete darkness, doing something that required everything he had left. Olga found out about the release from a journalist who called her. She had not been told in advance. She learned that her husband's last words were now public, that people across Russia and around the world had been reading them, through a phone call from a stranger. She has spoken about this only rarely, and only in fragments. The private note he had written for her in the first message. The note written while the lights were still on, while he still had strength and certainty. Those words have never been published in full. They were between a husband and a wife. What she has said publicly is this. Reading the notes felt like hearing his voice. Like one more conversation she hadn't known she was going to get. And the line at the end of the second note, the one written in the dark, addressed to no one specific, meant for whoever found it. That line is the one she returns to. No need to despair. The man who was dying in the dark told the living not to be sad, and she has been carrying that for 25 years. There's a phrase that gets used about military disasters. They died in service to their country. It's meant to be dignified. It can be, but the men in Compartment 9 did not die in service to their country. They died waiting for their country to serve them. They survived the unsurvivable. They were organized and disciplined and led by a man who kept his head in the dark. 23 survivors of a catastrophic explosion maintaining order in a flooding compartment for hours. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary thing. And what ended them was not the explosion, not the cold, not the darkness. What ended them was a 5-day delay and the decision of a government that could not bring itself to ask for help. The Kursk disaster did not change Russia. There were investigations, official reports, documented findings about faulty torpedoes and inadequate rescue equipment and criminal negligence in the chain of command. Some procedures changed. Some officials were quietly censured. But the instinct that produced those 9 days, the instinct to protect the image of power above all else, to silence the inconvenient, to manage the narrative instead of confronting the reality, that instinct didn't end in August 2000, is still there. It will always be there in governments that choose their reflection over their people. What endures from this story, what refuses to be buried under the politics and the official language and the carefully worded investigations, is a note found inside a jacket, water-damaged, illegible in places, the handwriting uneven and drifting, written in complete darkness, by a man who couldn't see what he was writing, who listed 23 names so that no one would be forgotten, who saved a private word for his wife, who told everyone else, the rescuers who hadn't come, the government that had failed them, the world that would eventually read it, not to despair. Dmitri Kolesnikov was recovered from Compartment 9 in the autumn of 2000, when the Russian Navy finally raised what remained of the Kursk from the seafloor. He was buried with full military honors. He was 27 years old. He had been married for 3 months. He put himself at the end of his own list. Last name, last in line. Even in death, he made sure everyone else came first. And somewhere in Vidyayevo, Olga still has a poem, written at a kitchen table, the night before he left, in the warm light of a room that still felt like the beginning of something. Some of the lines were about death. She thought it was romantic. Now she understands what it was. It was a man with a feeling he couldn't explain, and a pen, and someone he loved, trying to say something that mattered before the darkness came. He didn't know he was going to spend his last afternoon writing in the dark. He didn't know the lights were going to go out. He didn't know that by touch alone, with failing strength and failing air, he would produce the most extraordinary document to come out of the Barents Sea that August. He just knew to keep writing. His last words, regard to everybody, no need to despair. Kolesnikov, he told his wife not to worry. She has been carrying those words for 25 years. If this story moved you, if the name Dmitri Kolesnikov means something to you now, leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. These men deserve to be remembered by name, not as statistics, not as a chapter in a geopolitical case study, as the people they were. A turbine engineer who wrote love poems, a mother who would not stay quiet, a wife who kept a piece of paper safe because her husband had given it to her. The Kursk's forward section still rests on the floor of the Barents Sea. The rest was salvaged in 2001. A memorial in Vidyayevo carries all 118 names. Dmitri Kolesnikov is on that memorial. So is Sergei Tylik, Nadezhda's son, the son she tried to fight for in a community hall before a nurse with a syringe made sure she couldn't finish her sentence. She was right, by the way. History agreed with her, even if the Russian government didn't. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. There are more. There are always more. And in the meantime, remember Kolesnikov. He told us not to despair. The least we can do is listen.